Let's watch the Nvidia video. Let's watch Muda. And probably this will be the last one we do for the day. So Nvidia did lie to us. 5070 or yeah, 5070 4090 performance. I've heard a lot of people say it's not 4090 performance, it's more like 3090 performance. So let's see. I like Muda. We all like Muda. Everyone should like Muda.
One day, I'm gonna print this out and have this
Muda.
framed in the office. And
Muda is sexy. We love Muda. He didn't start speaking Hindi, so it's gonna be a normal video today.
RTX 5070 gives you 4090 performance. You know, a month ago I made a video where I kind of talked about this whole
I love the numbers. I think it was 4090 performance if you compared DLSS 3 to DLSS 4, something stupid like that.
Like Nvidia lying to you situation. And I'll be real with you, Nvidia did in fact appear to lie. This RTX 5070 does not give 4090 performance at $549. It's actually not a bad card, I would say, but it's definitely not something that I would consider to be mind-blowing if you're picking it up in the store. Especially now that AMD has sort of come out and basically dropped the RX 9070. Now, let me tell you, this card right here, I'm going to give AMD the congratulations. $600 for a value of the...
Okay. I keep hearing this $600. Let's go to Newegg and see if we can find actual prices. Let's see what it's actually going for. Okay. It's out of stock, so... we'll see how that really goes, because I don't buy it staying at this price. Because it's already well above MSRP in Australia. This seems very unlikely. Now, people bought them at this price, don't get me wrong, but I will be surprised if it stays at this price. What is the best AU city? Not Adelaide, because nothing ever fucking happens here. 90... what's another US store? Micro Center. 9070 XT. No, I know what the prices are for me. I want to know what they are in the US. Okay, so you can buy them in stores, it looks like. Yeah. At least at Center, you can get them physically in stores. The ones you can order online are entirely out of stock. I get my knowledge about Australia from Finding Nemo. That's all you need to know. Because if I go to PC Case, I'll show you again. We'll go to Scorp Tech as well. Am I logged in? Am I gonna get doxxed? No, we're good. Okay. 9070 XT. So that's that one. Here's this. So... oh, wait. One's in stock. $1,300. $1,100. $1,300. $1,300. $1,450. $1,300. $1,400. $1,300. Okay, so... most of these are out of stock, though. That's the thing. I think, yeah, everything here, they're all out of stock on Scorp Tech. And yeah, everything's out of stock on PC Case Gear as well. Yeah. Well...
3090 at $14.99 USD, 4K max settings, giving you 26% faster gaming.
So if they actually stay at this price, I will be impressed.
We'll look at more of these benchmarks in a second, ladies and gentlemen. That's some pretty good
AMD has the chance to make a giant fucking win here.
Competition to be seeing here, and we welcome that, okay?
Oh, sorry, what was it comparing it to here?
26%.
Okay, how much... Let me go to PC Case Gear again. Let's find 3090s. So, let's go... Where is it? Graphics cards? Okay, we can't see 3090 here anymore. Let's go. Let's see the 7900 XTX. How much is that going for right now? 1600. Fucking hell. I believe the card here was going for like something. It was like 2500 though. Actually, let me just show you the 5090. Because there we can see some real fun. Graphics cards. 5090. Look at that Australian price. Oh my lord. $6,000. This is not real. This is not a real GPU.
Faster gaming. We'll look at more of these benchmarks in a second, ladies and gentlemen. That's some pretty good competition to be seeing here, and we welcome that, okay? We stand that level of competition. So again, ladies and gentlemen, one thing that I want to bring up is obviously when Jensen Huang actually ended up going up on stage and talking about this 5070 4090 kerfuffle, he definitely said that there was going to be leveraging of AI, and let's be honest, DLSS frame generation was going to be used to basically carry up that, comparison, okay? A 5070 is not as fast as a 4090. Now, while this isn't shocking, there have been some benchmarks that have come out. This one from Ars Technica basically really shows you what this benchmarking is kind of all...
What do we have here? So, 5070, 4090, so... Okay... 47, okay.
All about comparing the 5070 to the actual 4090, for instance.
Right. Yeah, this is... Yeah, okay.
Right. Now, if you look at the 5070 right over here, you can see that in the orange bar, okay, running Cyberpunk 2077 at 4K, RT overdrive, which is the path tracing setting, the average FPS is 4.5 frames per second, okay? That means every second you are seeing, on average, 4 to 5 different screen transitions, okay? It's pretty obvious. Now, obviously, a 4090, which is what I have in my computer, renders that same game at 24.2 frames per second. So, no, you are not objectively getting that same level of performance at all.
No, but we don't compare the real numbers. AI, that's the solution to everything.
Start to change is when you start introducing all of the various assists. Now, in the 4090, when you enable DLSS, which is running the game at a lower resolution, and then basically projecting it up to a higher resolution through AI upscaling, you get 47.8 frames per second. That I can confirm. Path tracing is a very computationally expensive form of graphical rendering, and basically the top graphics cards are being bent over a barrel and fisted every time you enable this setting, no matter what the game, really. So when you enable frame...
I just don't like the direction that game development's going. I've talked about this 100 times, but I don't like this push towards making games more computationally hard to run with very little of value added.
Generation 2 times, that goes from 47.8 to 82 frames per second.
Wow.
And that is how you actually end up playing Cyberpunk 2077 with some level of fluidity on your multiple $1,000 graphics card, okay?
Single-digit FPS is embarrassing. Keep in mind, that single-digit FPS basically rendering a fucking Disney movie. Now, that's crazy that you can do that more than one time a second. But also, it's a bit excessive for a video game.
On a 5070, how do you go from 4.5 frames per second to something that rivals the 4090? Well, using DLSS,
Magic
that same
AI.
4.5 frames turns into 24.3 frames, which is basically around the 4090 natively running the game anyways without any form of upscaling. Then when you apply frame generation, you get 46.3 frames. Then when you quadruple the frame generation, you go from 46 to 84.5 frames per second, actually getting you somewhere higher than the 4090. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the actual latency involved in turning a fucking game that is actually rendering at 4 frames to 84 frames per second is something that I'm going to give Nvidia a big clap for. Because a lot of the reviews that I've kind of seen shows that there is a latency problem. But honestly, if you can make 4 frames running at 84 frames, even if they're fake, somehow fluid and playable, that I think requires a serious clap.
I do think what Nvidia's done is technically impressive. I just don't like that this is the direction we've gone, right? Like, you can do something very cool, but it shouldn't be done. And this is where we're at. I wish none of this AI upscaling tech ever existed. It's done so much fucking damage to game development.
Fucking impressive.
It is.
Now, obviously, there are other GPUs they have, like the 5070 Ti, which runs it at 16 frames per second natively, goes up to 33, then 59 by doubling, then quadrupling it to 111. And obviously, the highest tier of GPUs, the 5090, does in fact have an improvement over the 4090. In fact,
I would hope
it's
so.
rendering at 30
I really
frames
would.
natively, goes to 63 with DLSS, then 113 doubling, then 210 quadrupling. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how we sell fake frames to the audience. Now, I've seen a lot of debate in the last time I covered this a month ago. Muda, what is really the difference between a fake frame and a real frame? And the thing about it is...
Well, it looks like a smeary, blurry mess. You have a lot of input delay. The game ends up looking worse than a PS3 game because you're actually rendering the game internally at some stupidly low resolution. Yeah, basically all that.
In most cases, I think for most people playing a video game, you may not tend to notice these things. Unless you're somebody like me that literally likes to assess and analyze current-gen graphical technology, because this is actually kind of like an exciting thing for me. I love looking at, like, new graphical tech.
Speaking of that, let me just show you a picture that basically explains everything wrong with modern games. Where is it? Yeah, here. Here we go. Enjoy. That right there is modern video games. It's such a fucking perfect demonstration of the problem. Link? Okay, I'll send you the link. Here you go. Yo, Phoenix, how's it going? Like, the way we used to do reflections is we would just have a model on the other side, and it was so much cheaper, and it looked better in many cases. The sun wasn't blinding you. Things weren't horribly blurry. Yeah, it was a low resolution, but things weren't blurry. Yeah. I love this picture. I love it so much.
I'm looking at things like frame generation. You're obviously trying to look for the cracks in the matrix, right?
I like
So you're looking at things like latency issues. How
Mm-hmm.
does the game feel when I move my mouse around? Does it feel like a native 60 frames? Or does it feel like 30 frames that is kind of sluggishly looking like 60? You're looking for, if I move my mouse around rapidly, do I...
No, I think that is the mouse I have, actually. I think that is the G305.
start to see breaks? Like, is the frame generator having an issue keeping up with my rapid mouse movement? So these...
Having the other model isn't cheaper. You render the whole game twice. It's considerably cheaper than tracing every ray of light. It's wildly cheaper than tracing every ray of light.
These are all things that you're trying to look for as you play video games like this, right? When you're looking at things like ray tracing, you're trying to see if reflections are being made at a distance. You're trying to see if the lighting is filling areas properly. You're looking for a lot of, small things that end up leading to a big immersive change in your game. So when you look at that graph, obviously, I think Nvidia, lied. And people will say it's deceptive marketing. It's, just
Nothing
marketing nonsense. I will say that, putting that slide up is probably one of the biggest mistakes that I think Nvidia has done in terms of keeping their image for this level of card. And honestly, if you were to put that up there, even with an asterisk, it would be a pretty big sell to say that 5070 is somehow the 49.
The thing is, they don't care because there are way too many gamers who don't actually care about DLSS. So they can say this, like, oh, it's, it's actually because of AI, but no, people don't care. What they care about is the number. There is a lot of people who don't actually care how the game looks. All they care about is bigger number, better person. And when you're selling to those people, if you're gonna flub some numbers here and there, you're gonna use AI to upscale stuff and use that in your comparison to say the card's faster, well, you're selling to people that want that.
90. But obviously, if you put right under it, yeah, you'll need a lot of AI generating and upscaling to get there. People might have, some things to say about this, right? And that's really where the crux of this whole situation has gone to. Looking at Nvidia as a company, you can look at recently that they have basically blown up in the last several years. In 2021, in the data center market and the gaming market was actually bigger for them. In a span of literally years, just years, they've went from gaming being the one thing that they were basically, known for, the one big profiting part, to basically being 7% of their...
If you ever wondered why Nvidia acts the way they do, this is the reason. This right here is the reason. They don't give a shit about gamers. The gaming market has stayed, it's grown a little bit, but it's stayed roughly the same. The data center, though, they own the data center. They are the data center. AMD has fucking no place in the data center outside of very specific use cases. If we're talking AI, we're talking general compute, so much of it is just Nvidia.
Company's revenue. Right now, Nvidia makes so much money in the data center that I really don't think they give a fuck about being in the gaming space at all.
And honestly, they could sell it off entirely.
If they're making this sum of cash compared to the data center, I would probably focus on the fucking data center too. And nobody's gonna blame Nvidia for it. Now, obviously, AMD, which is kind of their direct competition, in fact,
this is why AMD has a chance to become a competitor in this space, because Nvidia is doing fucking nothing on the desktop. They have the chance to take over the desktop, and Nvidia doesn't care. They're not gonna fight back that hard.
Are their direct competition, you can see that these guys are not killing it in comparison to it. They're in the data center, and they're absolutely going up in the data center, not in the same, level and echelon as Nvidia. But in the gaming revenue, they've kind of seen a 60% drop. It really feels like in the gaming side of the world, maybe the GPUs just aren't as important as their investments in the data center. Now, in amongst all this, Nvidia's had some serious controversies in this entire GPU reveal that haven't been related to false advertising. You're talking about, obviously, the general scalpers, which, everyone complains about. It happens all the time. And I wish there were better protections against it.
The worst part about the scalpers is it's not even scalpers. It's the companies that are selling them. Like, it's the retailers. The retailers are scalping. It's like, hey, you want to pay $1,000 above MSRP? No. No, actually, I don't.
But let's say that you did happen to get your hands on an actual GPU from Nvidia, 50 series card. There was a pretty decent, somewhat chance that you might have had a card with significantly less ROPs. Now, what is a ROP in this
Oh,
situation?
that as
right?
well,
You probably
yeah.
heard this term a little bit. A ROP is a render output unit. So in the context
they
of
just
what
straight
a
up
GPU
lied about
is
the
doing,
performance.
the ROP handles the very final stages of the
AMD's APUs and consoles and stuff was keeping them alive in gaming. Yeah. I think AMD is very, you know, they very much want there to be some big push in the console space. Like, actually, wait, hold up. The Switch runs a Tegra, though, doesn't it? I think the Switch is the only one that doesn't use an AMD GPU. Yeah, the Switch is a Tegra. Yeah, well, I was gonna say, I guess they'd be excited for the Switch 2 release, but no, they want nothing to do with that.
the actual rendering process. So things like depth testing, stencil testing, blending, and writing to, again, the frame buffer. Think of it as what is doing the raster operations, the actual meat of the graphics card. If you lose any of these, then you are actually buying a gimped GPU. So when it came to the ROPs, some people noticed that they had less ROPs than what was supposed to be advertised. So a 5090 that was supposed to have 176 actually showed up in people's houses with 168. A 5080 that was supposed to have 112 showed up with 104. And a 5070 Ti that should have shown up with 96 actually showed up with 88.
That's just straight up a scam.
Now, how are you as a gamer supposed to validate this? Well, Nvidia did address this. Nowhere on their website am I finding an easy to download tool that would help people verify that they bought a defective GPU that they could immediately rip out of their computers and return to Nvidia and get a replacement as they should. Remember, if you haven't got what you were advertised, you should be liable to a refund or an exchange of the product.
Absolutely,
So in order
yes.
to verify this, you download a program known as CPU-Z Validator, and you basically check on your system if you have the appropriate number of ROPs in its actual description. If the number doesn't match what NVIDIA is advertising and you've bought one of these cards, please return it for an exchange, okay? You are actually getting less performance. And thanks to our friends over at Gamers Nexus, the guys who've done really good research on this.
This reminds me of when, was it the 970? Or was it the 1070? Where they advertised 4 gigabytes of RAM and it was like 3.5. I think it might have been the 970. That sounds right to me.
Shows that if you buy a defective card, for instance, games like Total War Warhammer 3 could see 11% decreases in the performance.
Oh.
You know, if you have a defective card. So again, the point is, the actual improvements that I see generally on these cards isn't all that much. But if you get something defective, you are basically paying thousands of dollars for something that literally is a very marginal increase over what you've gotten last time. And unless you really know what you look for, or you really test these cards, like
970, that sounds right.
Kind of money, you won't really know you have a problem until well after the warranty period exits. Now, one of the things with frame generation that I kind of want to address too before we go further into it is I'm not against this technology. So I want to just preface this by
I am. Okay, I'm not against it for its original purpose. The original purpose of having games perform better on older hardware, I think in that case, yeah, for sure. Or like slower hardware. But the problem now is frame generation has become sort of this... It's become this crutch where it's a requirement to play the game with a fucking 5090, right? That shouldn't be the case.
By saying that I think frame generation and upscaling is really cool when it comes to breathing extra life into older cards. For instance, if I have a card that's like 2-3 years older and I still want to play games at high settings, it should be cool to have upscalers, though I can run games at lower, resolutions, have them look just as sharp, and breathe extra years into my card's lifespan, right? And if we're talking about frame generators, right, if done right, and you're using it literally as a way to get extra life out of an older card, it's amazing. It's great technology. One case example I can show you right here is this is Grand Theft Auto 5.
It's become the fix game button, exactly.
I've enhanced running on my Steam Deck with all of the ray tracing settings enabled.
Wow.
Now normally this tanks the performance, but thankfully due to FSR 3, I could run this at a lower resolution, get more frame rate, get more life out of the GPU, and now I have a 30 frame ray traced experience.
The problem is that these upscaling and FG algorithms won't actually make a good difference if the raw rasterization is poor. So I don't see how they can make a difference with older cards like you and Muda say.
The problem is the upscaling FG algorithms won't actually make a good difference if the restoration is poor. Well, it's not going to be, like, okay, if we're dealing with a game which is, like, say you have a card, it's 5 years old, you're not going to be running the game in a perfect world at 540p. That's the problem that we're seeing. Because this is being used as a crutch, we're seeing native 1080p being rendered. So we're seeing 1080p being rendered natively at like crazy low resolutions. But if you go from 720 up to 1080, like that's a lot less of a gap. Or say you have a 1440p monitor, you go from 1080 to 1440. Like that's a lot less of a gap. And yes, it's going to be noticeable. But at the same time, you're allowing the card to play games that it otherwise wouldn't be able to play. The problem we're seeing right now is because it's being used as a crutch, modern cards are basically in that position of having to run a game as if they're a card from 5 years ago. If you get what I mean. Like, they're in that position right now. So when we get to that point of, you know, the slower cards being 5 years old, trying to play a modern game, it's just not going to be playable. It's going to be even worse. You're going to run at like 240p. It can help if you have 1440p screen, but a card can't get a good FPS above 1080p. Yeah, and I think starting from 720 or starting from 1080, you can do a lot of work here. It's just because we need to... Won't artifacts be a major issue? Sure, yeah, it absolutely will be. But if your options are, my GPU can't play the game on low, or I can play it with, you know, low, medium settings at a lower resolution because of upscaling, I think for that, it certainly does have a use, right? Like, if we're talking cards that are old, the game's not going to look good no matter what you do. But for those people who don't want to upgrade, being able to keep something alive longer, I do think it's a good option to have there. It might not be the thing for everyone, right? Some people might just want to go and upgrade their GPU, but I would like people to be able to hold on to GPUs that are still perfectly fine for way longer.
It's on the go. This, in my experience, is the perfect use case for this stuff. But the biggest problem here is when modern games released right now require you to effectively use those frame generators to reach playable frame rates with up-to-date cards. Games like Monster Hunter Wilds that pretty much outright tell you, hey, in our recommended settings, you're gonna want to have frame generators. Otherwise, it's not gonna run as well. That's not good optimization, and those are games and software you should stay away from. And if these crutches...
And especially on laptops, because you have a smaller screen, you can get away with lower... You can get away with it looking worse, solely because you're gonna... It's harder to see it.
End up becoming, if these tools end up becoming, you know, baseline operational standards, we're gonna have issues going forward with gaming performance, gaming optimization, right? Frame generators and upscalers should never be used as a requirement to achieve a frame rate. They should be used to breathe extra life into older cards or help older, cheaper cards in a generation kind of reach some level of performance parity with their higher end brethren. You are giving up things. Nobody's denying that. But this shouldn't be a thing where you're buying the most top-end card and you somehow need these tools to achieve what you should have been able to natively. So looking at a 5070 in Canada, for instance, a 5070 Ti that I'm able to get with 16 gigs
Canada Computers and Electronics. What a simple name.
Of memory is currently $1,369 Canadian, right? And of course, if I go and check more...
Let's go to Australia. Okay, so what are we looking at? 5070 Ti, 5070 Ti. Not crazy. Not good, but not crazy. 1900 of the cheaper ones are sold out. Hopefully they come back at around the same price. Yeah.
More of these actual systems, you can see that's probably around the typical average of $1,334 to $2,103, as according to Google's shopping, search index. Now, at this moment in time, that
Aussie bucks are literally rupees, not far off.
price is still relatively expensive. So obviously, looking around at other vendors in this space, even the cheapest option, the 5070 Ti without any overclocking, is $1,000 Canadian. And remember, the 5070 Ti, there are vendors that are silently increasing the base MSRP price of these cards. So they're somehow more expensive than what they really should be because of things like scarcity, tariffs, a whole bunch of external forces. Now that 9070 XT that I was showing earlier, which is actually the competitor to Nvidia's 5070 Ti that we were just looking at, is starting at $600 US. And from what I've seen and what I've heard, the stock on these things are actually pretty good. Apparently, they're going to be in gamers' hands.
They're not anymore. Not anymore. The stock's fucked.
And I really hope that's the case. Nobody will know until the actual release date. But to give you an idea, 600 USD to Canadian is $860. So comparing it to what's already on the market right now, being over 1,000, that's not a fucking bad price for a GPU, ladies and gentlemen, especially one that offers, if you really wanted to look at it, like the 4080 levels of performance at what, like half its actual launch MSRP. Kind of insane pricing over here.
Yeah.
And again, looking more into AMD's technology over here, AMD's actual system, one thing that I have seen from AMD's reveal is that they've actually started to give a shit about things like ray tracing, which is starting to not obviously match Nvidia, but it's getting closer. When I started to look at things like AI upscaling, like FSR4, they're not as good as NVIDIA's newest DLSS, but they're also not a mile behind.
Well, the thing with DLSS, doesn't it require integration from the game developer? Whereas FSR, you can just slap onto any game, if I'm understanding it correctly.
Like they used to be. It's somewhere in that sweet spot where, yes, you know that you're buying a cheaper card compared to the actual competition, but it's not so...
Do you think it's an actual developer skill issue when games are super unoptimized? I can't really see a world where you know what you're doing and still struggling so much to optimize a game. Is it skill issue or just the burden of abstraction hell? I think it's a number of things. I think it's a time issue for sure. Time is definitely a big thing. I think it's a companies don't give a shit issue, right? Like, I'm sure the engineers working on Monster Hunter Wilds know how fucking cooked the game is. But Capcom sold 8 million copies in the first 3 days. It's gonna be the most selling Capcom game of all time. Right? Like, yeah, it might be a problem for people who care, but if the money says otherwise, they're not gonna care, and they're not gonna try to push things back to make it so things can fit.
Far behind that you can just simply scoff at it, right? And obviously, both these cards and both these systems introduce things like frame generators. And a lot of those frame generators end up pushing games like Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 from 57 frames all the way up to 147 frames, at least in this simple calculation from AMD's actual website. Now,
actually, speaking of Nvidia, they removed 32-bit physics. So now old games using physics actually run worse than they do on like old cards from the time. So if you go play Borderlands 2 with the latest generation cards using physics, it will run at like 10 FPS. Yay.
Obviously, in the space of gaming, when I start to look at the actual, like, memory as well, too, they're not even scoffing at it. For both the cheaper version of this card, the one at $550, versus the $600 9070 XT, you're still getting 16 gigs of memory on both these cards. So they're not
was
scoffing.
I looking at the 9070 XT? I actually haven't. Sorry, let me see the price on the 9070. It didn't even click with me. Those are two different cards. So that's the 9070, that's the 9070 XT. 9070 in Australia is... Okay. So that's 1100, 1150, 1200-ish. And then this one's 1500. I don't know why I didn't click with those for two different cards.
At any of it, this is actually a pretty good value for a graphics card, and one that I'm actually so happy that AMD actually decided to compete at this level with Nvidia. Nvidia, obviously, I don't think that really matters for them. They're in the data center stuff anyways, but for gamers, this is not bad competition. Look, obviously, if you're in the
It's kind of like what happened with Ryzen, where Intel was just kind of sitting around doing fucking nothing. Intel was like, who needs more than a quad core on the desktop? And then AMD's like, hey, have Ryzen. 6 cores at the baseline. And they perform better on single core. Get fucked.
End space, Nvidia is still the biggest option for you. But I would wager to say that most people who are PC gaming are not in the super high-end places. Most people probably don't have 4090s,
like X3D is a really cool chip.
Probably the 5090 as well. These are enthusiast-level cards meant for people that have way too much money to burn, content creators, or, just people that are doing something beyond gaming that need these GPUs. Things like AI stuff or whatever, right? That's primarily what these GPUs are meant for. For the average gamer, that RX 9070 XT is actually not a bad deal. So honestly, down the road, this is such a good presentation that I'm considering downgrading from my 4090 to the 9070 XT. I might pick up 2 of these cards and put them into my system, not for some crossfire or any of that nonsense, but because I kind of want to go back to my old school virtual machine systems where I tend to have 2 systems in one box. So I used to have a dual PC streaming rig. I actually had 2 GPUs in my system until I got the 4090, which was so big that I couldn't fit anything in the second PCI
Oh yeah, that's
slot.
the other thing. The 4090 and the 5090 are fucking giant cards. They also light on fire, which is also fun. Yeah, I like the power cables burning.
Couldn't even find a way to do that unless I decided to have like the most draconian level box imaginable. But I could actually go back to that. I could actually use this card. And given Linux's general benefit in terms of AMD's drivers, it might not even be bad. I might generally lose some performance, but I lose performance using a 4090 underneath Linux anyways.
Sure.
But with better drivers, I don't think having a 9070 XT is actually all that bad. It's an updated GPU, and honestly, I don't think this is a bad situation whatsoever. Yeah, AMD kind of brought the fucking heat over here. Nvidia, I think this generation definitely sold a lot more lies. Again, people will say it's deception or whatever, but I do genuinely think the way that they kind of sold this series was a lie. Okay, I don't think AI generation and frame upscaling and all this stuff is necessarily inherently evil, but when it's being used to sell a massive upgrade over the previous generation, when I personally don't see that massive upgrade in traditional render rasterization, that's something worth talking about, okay? That's something worth discussing. Honestly, AMD's kind of hit Nvidia in the gaming space where I think it's really going to hurt. And considering the price difference and the value you get, I think personally you would have to be a fucking moron to pick the 5070 Ti over the 9070 XT. But unless in a specific case, NVIDIA software would...
The only reason why you do it is CUDA. That's the... CUDA and, like, a couple of, like, NVIDIA tools. But if you're just doing just gaming, no, you're a moron if you're buying it.
Which is still better, somehow works better in a specific case for you, maybe that could make sense. But dollars to donuts, this ain't a bad deal. God damn. Gaming GPUs are interesting, man. Team Red or Team Green? I think with what AMD has shown, Team Red is definitely the future for me. And, sometime when this releases, I may consider buying this and sticking it in my actual system. If you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Dislike it if you dislike it.
We do
am out.
love Muda. and maybe the RT for Blender. That was a good video. Nvidia doesn't give a shit about the desktop because they made $47 billion in the server space. So why should they give a shit? Right? Like, why at all should they care if they made so much money outside of it? Yeah. Good rep? I don't know. They don't need to give good rep. They made $47 billion. They don't need your fucking rep. Oh, we have bad rep with the gamers. We lose $1 billion. Oh, our server space is growing by $10 billion a year. Who cares? Yeah. I don't like the way that Nvidia is handling things, but I get why they're doing it. The money talks. The money talks, and they're going towards the money.